You know, there's something quite peculiar about the way we've come to understand reality. We walk through life with such certainty, such conviction, that what we perceive is all there is. We clutch our beliefs like lifeboats in a vast ocean, never questioning if perhaps the ocean itself is an illusion, or if our desperate clinging is what's actually causing us to drown. The warning that I feel compelled to share with you today isn't meant to frighten you, but rather to awaken you from a slumber so profound that you've forgotten you're even asleep. Consider for a moment how we experience our lives, always reaching, always striving, always convinced that happiness lies just beyond the next achievement, the next possession, the next relationship. It's as if we're running on a treadmill, exhausting ourselves while remaining in exactly the same place. And no matter how fast we run, how desperately we reach, that elusive sense of fulfillment continues to hover just beyond our grasp. This isn't a coincidence. It's the nature of a profound misunderstanding about what we are and what reality is. The roots of this misunderstanding can be traced back to what Eastern philosophers have long recognized as a case of mistaken identity. We've come to believe that we are separate entities, isolated consciousness trapped within bodies, desperately trying to navigate a foreign and sometimes hostile universe. But this belief in separation is precisely the illusion that causes our suffering. It's like the sun believing it's separate from its rays, or the ocean believing it's separate from its waves. The Buddhist traditions speak of this as avidya, fundamental ignorance or misperception, while the Advaita Vedanta tradition describes it as maya, the cosmic illusion. What we've done, you see, is confused the map for the territory. We've mistaken our mental models, our concepts, our ideas about reality for reality itself. It's as if we're looking at a menu and believing we're eating the actual meal, and then wondering why we're still hungry. Our thoughts about life aren't the same as the direct, immediate experience of being alive, yet we continually retreat into our heads rather than dropping into the vivid, pulsing reality that surrounds us. Have you ever noticed how your suffering intensifies the more you identify with your thoughts about a situation rather than the situation itself? How an experience becomes bearable or unbearable, not based on what's actually happening, but on the story you're telling yourself about what's happening. This isn't to dismiss real pain or challenges, but to recognize how our mental interpretations can transform a difficult moment into an unbearable one, or conversely, transform adversity into opportunity. What if you could step outside this narrative even for a moment? What if reality is far more magnificent, far more mysterious, and far more liberating than the cage of concepts we've constructed around it? I invite you to share your thoughts on this. Have you ever experienced a moment when the boundaries between you and the world seemed to dissolve? When you felt, even briefly, that you were not separate from everything around you, but rather an expression of it? The reality we live in is layered with illusions that we've collectively agreed to believe. The most fundamental of these illusions is that we exist as separate, independent selves. When you look closely at your experience, moment by moment, can you actually find this separate self? We point to our bodies, but our bodies are constantly changing, cells dying and being reborn, atoms exchanging with the environment. We point to our thoughts and feelings, but these arise and pass away like clouds in the sky. Who is the stable I that allegedly owns these thoughts and feelings? If you look for this separate self, you'll find something astonishing. It's nowhere to be found. Not because you don't exist, but because what you are is far more fluid, far more interconnected, and far more mysterious than the limited concept of a separate self. You're like a whirlpool in a river. You exist as a recognizable pattern, but you're not separate from the flowing water that comprises you. The atoms in your body were once part of stars. The air you breathe connects you to all other breathing beings. Your thoughts are shaped by language and culture that existed long before you were born. The illusion of separation gives rise to our persistent anxiety, our sense that something is always missing or wrong. If I am here and happiness is there, then I must strive, achieve, and acquire to bridge that gap. But what if there is no gap? What if the happiness we seek is not a distant goal to be attained, but our natural state when we cease identifying with our limited self-concept? Think about those moments when you've been so absorbed in an activity that you forgot yourself entirely, perhaps while creating art, playing music, or being in nature. In those moments, the boundary between doer and doing dissolved, and paradoxically, you felt most alive, most authentic. This wasn't an achievement, it was a recognition of what was already the case when your self-referential thinking temporarily subsided. Our conventional way of seeing creates a subject-object division, me in here, world out there. But this division is conceptual, not actual. In direct experience, there is seeing, but no seer separate from what is seen. There is hearing, but no hearer separate from what is heard. There is thinking, but no thinker separate from thoughts that arise and pass away. When we drop below our conceptual understanding, we discover that reality is a seamless, undivided process rather than a collection of separate things. This might sound abstract, but it has profound implications for how we live. When we believe we are separate, we operate from fear, fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of death. We build walls, both physically and psychologically. We compete rather than cooperate. We extract rather than nurture. We judge rather than understand. But when we recognize our interconnectedness, a natural compassion emerges. We see that others' suffering is our suffering, their joy our joy. This isn't moral philosophy, it's the direct recognition of how reality actually is. The void or emptiness that underlies all forms is not a bleak nothingness, but rather a pregnant potentiality from which all things arise. It's the canvas upon which the painting of existence appears, the silence from which music emerges. When we begin to sense this underlying dimension, it can be disorienting, even terrifying. The ego, which has maintained the illusion of control, recoils from this apparent threat to its existence. But this vertigo is a necessary phase in our awakening. The Zen tradition speaks of this as the great death, not the death of the body, but the death of the illusion of a separate self. And just as the caterpillar must surrender to the dissolving of its form before it can emerge as a butterfly, we too must allow our limited self-concept to dissolve before we can recognize our true nature. This dissolution isn't something we do. In fact, any attempt to dissolve the ego only strengthens it. Rather, it's the natural result of seeing clearly without the distortions of our conditioning. I invite you to join me on this journey of exploration. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the nature of consciousness, to questioning our most basic assumptions about reality, and to discovering the freedom that comes from seeing through the illusion of separation. Subscribe if you feel called to continue this inquiry, as future videos will delve deeper into various aspects of this awakening process. This isn't about gaining more knowledge. It's about directly recognizing what you already are beneath the layers of conditioning and concept. As we explore the dance of polarities, notice how every aspect of our experience exists in relation to its opposite: light and dark, pleasure and pain, birth and death. These aren't separate phenomena, but different expressions of a unified process. Our conventional thinking attempts to embrace one side while rejecting the other, creating an internal war that can never be won. We want pleasure without pain, gain without loss, life without death. But this is like wanting waves without troughs or inhaling without exhaling. What happens when you stop resisting this fundamental complementarity? When you recognize that joy and sorrow, success and failure, love and loss are not opposing forces but necessary aspects of a complete life. there's a profound shift that occurs, not a passive resignation, but an active embrace of the totality of experience. Can you sense how accepting the inseparability of opposites might transform your relationship with life's inevitable fluctuations? This understanding leads us to a profound inflection point, where consciousness transcends its habitual dualistic perspective. It's not that the distinctions between things disappear on a practical level. You can still tell the difference between hot and cold, self and other, life and death. Rather, these distinctions are recognized as conceptual conveniences rather than absolute realities. They're like the lines on a map, useful for navigation, but not actually present in the territory they represent. After this recognition, something remarkable happens. We return to ordinary life, but with an extraordinary difference. The world doesn't change, but our relationship with it transforms completely. Washing dishes is still washing dishes, conversations still unfold, challenges still arise, but none of these experiences are happening to a separate self. They're simply happening as natural expressions of a vast and intelligent process that has no inside or outside. Living with this understanding doesn't mean floating around in a perpetual state of bliss, detached from the practicalities of life. Quite the contrary. It means showing up fully for life as it is, without the distorting filters of our conditioning. It means responding appropriately to each situation without the added burden of self-concern. It's not that you become selfless in the sense of denying your own needs. Rather, you recognize that your true nature has never been limited to this separate body-mind. There may be resistance to this understanding, and that's entirely natural. The ego, which has invested so much in maintaining its illusory boundaries, will generate all manner of objections and doubts. You might think, if there's no separate me, then who's responsible for my actions? Or, if everything is one, then why should I care about anything in particular? These questions arise from applying dualistic logic to a non-dual understanding, like trying to measure temperature with a ruler. The dissolution of the separate self doesn't mean the end of functional identity or moral responsibility. In fact, it leads to a more authentic expression of who you are and a more compassionate engagement with the world. When you're no longer defending a limited identity, your natural qualities can express themselves more freely. When you're no longer viewing others as fundamentally separate, your natural empathy can flow more readily. The journey isn't always easy. There can be confusion, disorientation, even a dark night of the soul where everything you thought you knew seems to fall away. But through these challenges, something essential is being revealed. Not a new belief or concept, but the direct recognition of what you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning. And this recognition isn't a one-time event, but a continual unfolding, as the implications of this understanding penetrate every aspect of your life. Consider how a drop of water might fear being absorbed into the ocean, not realizing that in that absorption, it doesn't lose itself, but expands into its true nature. Our fear of losing our individuality keeps us imprisoned in a limited identity, not recognizing that what awaits us is not annihilation, but expansion. The separate self doesn't die so much as it opens into its larger context, like a fist unclenching to reveal the hand that was always there. The integration of these apparent opposites, being both an individual expression and the universal expressing itself, both wave and ocean, both unique and connected, is not a philosophical position, but a lived reality. It's not something you achieve, it's something you recognize. And in that recognition, the war between what you are and what you think you should be comes to an end. This recognition ripples outward, transforming not just your inner landscape, but your relationship with everything and everyone. You begin to see that each person, regardless of their apparent flaws or limitations, is also an expression of this same boundless awareness. This doesn't mean condoning harmful behavior, but it does mean seeing beyond behavior to the essential nature that we all share. The path of awakening is unique for each person. Some may have dramatic insights, while for others, the process is so subtle they hardly notice it happening. Some may be drawn to intensive meditation or self-inquiry, while others find their way through creative expression, relationship, or immersion in nature. There's no right or wrong way, no standardized timeline or checklist of experiences. The only constant is an increasing intimacy with life as it is, rather than as we think it should be. And yet, despite this uniqueness, we're not alone on this journey. The recognition of our interconnectedness naturally gives rise to community, not based on shared beliefs or practices, but on the shared recognition of our common nature. This isn't a community of the like-minded, but of the like-hearted, those who sense, however dimly or clearly, that we are expressions of a reality that transcends our individual lives while simultaneously expressing itself perfectly through those lives. What emerges through this journey is not an escape from the world, but a more complete participation in it. The boundary between spiritual practice and everyday life dissolves. Cooking dinner becomes as sacred as meditation, a conversation with a stranger as profound as studying ancient texts. This isn't because you're projecting spirituality onto ordinary activities, but because you're recognizing the extraordinary nature of what we've been calling ordinary. The ultimate paradox, perhaps, is that what we've been seeking, peace, fulfillment, belonging, has never been absent. Like fish searching for water, we've been immersed in what we seek, unable to recognize it because of our preconceptions about what it should look like. The warning that shakes your reality to its core is simply this: what you are cannot be found because it was never lost. The separation you fear has never occurred except in thought. When you look closely at the nature of your own awareness, this knowing presence in which all experiences arise, you discover something astonishing. It has no boundaries, no beginning or end. It is not limited to your body or mind. It is not born and does not die. This boundless awareness is not something you possess, it's what you are. And recognizing this directly, not as a concept but as lived experience, is the homecoming we've all been longing for. The journey comes full circle when we realize that what we've been seeking through all our striving, all our achievements, all our accumulations, has been here all along. The peace that passes understanding is not a distant goal, but the very ground of our being. The love we seek outside ourselves is the very nature of what we are. The wisdom we chase through endless learning is already complete within us. In this recognition, life continues to unfold with all its complexity and challenge, joy and sorrow, achievement and disappointment. But it unfolds within a vastly different context, not as the story of a separate self struggling against a world, but as the seamless expression of a boundless awareness playing in the realm of form. You are both the play and the witness of the play, both the dance and the space in which the dance occurs. The warning that shakes your reality to its core is ultimately a call to awakening, not to a new or improved version of yourself, but to what you've always been behind the veil of conditioning. It's an invitation to step out of the dream of separation into the recognition of your true nature. And in that recognition, you find what you've always been seeking, not the fulfillment of desires, but the dissolution of the sense that anything is lacking. Not the achievement of perfection, but the recognition that what you are is already complete. In the end, the greatest freedom comes not from getting what we want, but from recognizing that we already are what we've been seeking. The boundary between seeker and sought dissolves, and what remains is simply this: the wonder and mystery of existence expressing itself perfectly as everything that is, including what you call you. And in this recognition, even in the midst of life's inevitable challenges, there arises a peace that cannot be disturbed, a joy that doesn't depend on circumstances, and a love that embraces all things. just as they are. Tentar novamente,